Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week, Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. And welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, Reverend Dr. D, and we have with us a special guest here on the program. His name is Matthew McWhorter, and he has a very interesting conversation we're going to have. I'm going to give you the website before we even get started and give Matthew a chance to say hello. Canon Crossfire is the website, canoncrossfire.com, and it's not what you think, not that kind of a cannon. No, there are no giant balls of iron that are being hurled around, although there are those who will use Canon as an iron ball to get people to submit or do this or that or the other. Matthew, thank you so much for being with us here on the program. I have been looking forward to this conversation for a while.
Greatly appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. And just so everyone knows, it's Canon of Scripture, so Canon. Some high school football player has the Canon Crossfire with the 2 ends. So,
well, folks, we're going to talk about, speaking of Canon of Scripture, I was born and raised Catholic, Matthew, and I was also introduced at a very early age to the Bible, but I was also introduced to what is referred to in Catholicism as the apocryphal scriptures. Now, there are a few here, like, Tobit and Judith and the Wisdom of Solomon and Sirach, as well as several others, including the Book of Enoch. And there are even others like there's a Gospel of Mary Magdalene and so on and so forth. There are even 2 in particular they put together in a single volume. I think it's called The Forgotten Books of Eden and the Lost Books of the Dead, or Book of the Dead. And the thing that really struck me, and this is something that I raised when I was working for 15 years back in the 80s and early 90s for a Christian radio station in Phoenix, Arizona. I asked who determined what books would go in what most Protestants know of as the 66 books of the Bible. And I think in the Catholic Bible, is it 69?
73.
73, thank you.
Yep.
And I said, who set whoever it was up to make this determination as to what books would be in the canon, or what I like to refer to as the ancient wisdom teachings? And I never really got a good answer. At least it made sense to me. So I kind of want to start there as to how the current version of, and let's maybe keep it simple, I guess, and maybe we need to incorporate both versions, the Catholic and Protestant versions of the Bible. What can you tell us about how this book was compiled, not in terms of who wrote what and when and where and the authenticity, but in terms of who made the determination as to the 66 or 72 books in the Bible.
Yeah, and that's a key part of my book is discussing this and how it comes to be. But part of what I did in the book was to divorce the decisions that were made later as to what the Bible would be versus what the early church did. So if you ask on, for example, the Catholic canon, which has more books, you'll often hear from Protestants that, well, the Catholics added books to the canon. Well, that's a claim that there was earlier a smaller canon, and that Catholics added these books at Trent, Council of Trent, the 1500s AD.
Mm-hmm.
And the Catholic answer to that is we didn't add anything. They were already accepted. The Protestant claim is, well, no, they weren't accepted. So that's where my book came in, was to investigate that. But the actual decisions of both Protestants and Catholics come way later. They come, way after Christ, 1500 years for final formal decisions. And you'll also hear from Protestants that the Catholics, as I say, they added the books at this Council of Trent. It's at Trent that they use the word canon to describe what they're doing, which has a special meaning, particularly to certain kinds of Protestant theology, etc. But there actually was an earlier council, 80 years before the birth of Martin Luther, at which the Catholics acknowledged that they accepted all of these books. They just didn't use the word canon. So even the dates of when they decided these things, how they decided them, etc., gets a little bit convoluted to people. But the fact is that those decisions are being made later. Even as we look back to the very earliest church, there is a time when people didn't have a book called the Bible. They literally did not have the technology of a book. What in formal terms is called a codex. But the idea of things on pages bound together on one side, inside covers, that did not really exist. People were using scrolls, and to people with scrolls, you didn't, there wasn't even a concept of being a complete collection. You might be okay with having some of them, not all of them, or you might be okay with, kind of like, as you look behind me, all these books, like, well, okay, these are the books that matter most to me, but I still have all the others.
Yeah.
I don't exclude them, right? So actually, the concept of a canon is an interesting theological development within Christianity, and there's a whole discussion to be had about what is a canon, why have it, who gets to make it, am I bound by that? Is this an individual choice or is this a church choice, for example, etc.? From my perspective, going way back to my story, I was an atheist and I was investigating. My name actually is Matthew Mark McWhorter. I was literally named after the first two Gospels. And I was reading it for the first time in my life, late in life. And I got interested in it and started looking into what was true or what not about Christianity. And at the same time, I wasn't being recruited by a church. I wasn't being recruited by a person. I just was interested in the books I was named after. So I went on Amazon, right, to buy Bibles. I find out there's Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox have three different Bibles with three different books, levels of books in them. They all have different translations. They all have extensive commentaries where they're explaining the Bible to you. The only answer I knew, being who I am and how I live, was to, as you can see, buy all of them and read them all and start sorting that out. So my question was, what did the earliest Christians think and say about these books? And that was the research that I undertook. And I decided I basically had to get that out to people. And so I will show in my book, this didn't exist. I went all over trying to find the book that would just show me what every Christian in the first 450 years said about these books. 451 AD is the first schism. So this is pre-schism. What do all the Christians have to say about them? And I wanted to know that so that I could make my own decisions. That's the core of the book. I show people, how I analyze it, etc. But what I'm really doing, I'm giving you all the quotes for you to read yourself, and I'm showing you how I assembled them so that you don't have to take my word on anything. Go double check everything as far as you want. I show you where to go find it, how to know you have all the quotes, etc., and make your own determination, because as you see when you look at these decisions that are made later, everyone is claiming that the early church followed their view. And the only way to figure out who really is correct about that and what the early church really did is to go back and read the early church itself. And that is what I did.
Well, and I don't want to get too deep into the subject of eschatology per se, but I'll tell you what really frustrates me. These books have been around based upon, again, what you've shared with us for what would you say, 1,500 years, roughly? Just a rough guess of about 1,500 years, right?
Oh, 2000 and even longer. They're Jewish books, so they
Well,
actually are thought to predate Jesus.
well, in terms of the Old Testament, yes, I agree with you there. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So they've been around for a long time. And
Sure.
then, the earliest Christians would be looking at them almost 2,000 years ago, right?
But here's the kicker for me, and this is what I've been hearing. I've been seeing some of these little videos, and of course, I'm watching these little videos online, maybe it's Facebook or what have you, I'm taking it with a grain of salt. And I am hearing these individuals who they claim to be believers, and so on and so forth. And they say, for example, they go back to the Old Testament and they go back to the Ten Commandments. And one of the commandments, as I learned it, and it says, has always been for me, is thou shalt not kill. Okay. But these videos are saying, that word was mistranslated. Now, they claim that actually the word for kill should have been thou shalt not murder. Now, I'm not here to argue that specific, but what I am here to ask you about is this, especially in light of the books that you have found and you talk about in your book. These books have been around for over 2,000 years, and you now are saying that you have the inside track to the basic knowledge of the translation, and that everybody else up until now has been wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I don't buy it. And there are other passages in the Bible, whether it's Old or New Testament, where they will make similar claims. Well, this word was mistranslated. And I remember I read a book early on in my Christian broadcasting career in the mid 80s, written by a gentleman by the name of John Noe. And his book was called The Apocrypha. Oh, come on now. Why can't I remember the name of the book now? John Noe is his name. And anyway, the premise of the book was this, that Christianity had been taken down a primrose path, meaning that, for example, in the New Testament, Paul is quoted as saying that they will be caught up to meet him in the air in the clouds of glory. Now, I did what he did, and I grabbed my Strong's Concordance, and I went through the process of defining some of those words. Well, his conclusion, and the reason I did the same thing he did, was because I didn't want to say, oh, by the way, Matthew, John Noe says, so I'm giving you secondhand information. I wanted to research it myself, and so I did. That is considered sort of the rapture passage. And based upon what I found, again, this is just me, my observations and research, there's nothing physical happening there. That is not referring to a physical event where the physical human body is rising above the ground into the clouds. It's all metaphorical. It's symbolic. The clouds of glory has to do with the saints who went before, and so on and so forth. And I researched a lot of this stuff. And so this kind of goes back to what I'm kind of asking you in terms of what you have read. Obviously, you started out with Matthew and Mark as far as your research, which I find very interesting that you were so intrigued that you did this research that actually changed your belief system, your philosophy of life. Can you talk a little bit about what you have found over the years in researching all of these different, whether they be the 66 or the 72 or the other 100 that aren't part of this book, that maybe have enlightened you or maybe astonished you, but it's not necessarily something that you go around telling people, oh, and by the way, da-da-da-da-da, because that translation isn't right, or the King James isn't right, or the New American Standard, or I even have a Yahweh version. All right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And several others. But I would love for you to respond to that.
Yeah. So as I say, my name was Matthew Mark. So I was just reading the books from that perspective. I had major medical problems. as a result, that people start asking you about what's your bucket list and all that sort of stuff. These books were right there next to the cowboy Western novels that my grandfather had left me and I had never read. That was my only interest in them, was just, I'm going to read them because I said I would read them someday, so I'm going to read it. But as I started reading the Gospels, and I recommend this to anybody who isn't Christian, is trying to find out about Christianity, start with the Gospels, read the New Testament. You will find out why you want to pay attention to the Old Testament after you read the New Testament. So that was a key part of my development as well. But I start with that. I'm saying, wow, this, I also tell people as a, totally uneducated, non-religious person about this. I had a vague idea of Christianity, etc. I didn't even know basic things like how much life advice there is in the Bible that I had missed out on because I'd never read it. I wasn't sure why people go to church. Like, it just seems like a social club. Like, what is that? I had to read the Bible to find these things. And as I was reading through the Gospels, and then as I went into the epistles and into Revelations and then back through the Old Testament, there was just a growing realization that this book explains the universe better than all of the psychology and philosophy and stuff that I had read in my secular reading throughout my life. And it just sort of started to make sense of a whole lot of things that don't otherwise make sense to me. And as I started to appreciate that, I grew curious. I'm like, well, this is a great story. This explains a lot of things. Um, is it true? Or is this just somebody's comic book that they drew up in the sand 2,000 years ago, and here we are? And so that led me into the books, The Case for Christ, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and that J. Warner Wallace, etc. The whole discussion of, was there really a person named Jesus? Did he really rise from the dead? Did he, do we have the stories from the original apostles, etc.? That's where my research came in. And this, to go back to your question about like the translations, etc., the answer for much of this is to go back in time and find out. Because like you, I read many things that say, I saw somebody try to resolve the dispute between Protestants and Catholics on an issue of the canon where they say, well, you can translate this word this way, etc. It's like, so you're the first person to have realized that ancient Greek could be used that way in all this history. And remember that almost everybody you will read from in the past actually knew Greek. It's only us moderns who don't learn Greek and Latin. Like, all those ancient people knew this stuff. You can go back, 1,500 years, et cetera, and be reading the fathers as I did. And, they spoke Greek and they tell you different things. Like, anyway, it's amazing the hubris that people sometimes have as they go through this stuff. And then, but second is, how do you sort between two experts, one telling you to translate it this way and one telling you to treat it that way? Answers: go back in time. Go back to what was originally there, and what people are creating later is suspect, right? It's suspicious. Now, science advances, etc. It could be the situation that the modern is better, but you go back in time to test it and to look at it, and you frequently find the answers that way. And that's part of what I was trying to do, was to go back and find, well, what did the fathers themselves say about this book? And in fact, and part of my book is also to find out, what do the Jews say about these extra books that Christians don't accept, or some Christians don't accept, etc. Is the Jewish story the same that you read from a Christian writer trying to persuade you, to either reject the books or accept the books? Like, what do the Jews say? They don't really, they don't have our Christian concerns. What are they telling me? It's just that sort of thing, to go back and try to find it. Another example of this sort of interpretation and issue is the number 666. The number of the beast. It's the earliest copies of the book of Revelations that we possess actually have the number 616. However, the earliest discussion of this actually goes back farther than the scraps of paper we have from the book of Revelations on 616. Goes back to a gentleman named Irenaeus, and he says he learned, and Irenaeus is crucial to so much of this stuff. Irenaeus learned from a guy named Polycarp, who learned from John. So he is one step removed from the authentic apostles, if Irenaeus can be trusted and believed. And Irenaeus says that John taught that the number was 666, not 616, and says 616 is a mistake. So when you see that, and that's why modern Bibles will usually say 666. We trust Irenaeus and his testimony. Well, Irenaeus will also tell you that John taught a book called Baruch, which is not found in Protestant Bibles, for example, or the Protestant Bibles that don't include any of the Apocrypha, I should say.
Hmm.
To the Catholics, that is a book accepted just as much as any other book of the Old Testament because Irenaeus said it came from John. So, that's part of the issue that's involved here is that when people want to tell you about how Christianity is true and the Bible that, the New Testament is true, they will quote Irenaeus and tell you that Irenaeus can be trusted because he learned from Polycarp, who learned from John. When you change the topic and want to discuss this book of Baruch, all of a sudden they'll tell you that Irenaeus can't be trusted. That's the crossfire I'm talking about. That's the canon crossfire. Your witness is telling me two different things, and
Hmm.
you're telling me to only believe them on one and not the other. And even more importantly to the scope of my book and what I'm trying to do is these scholars are talking to two different audiences and not recognizing this crossfire. So when they're talking to skeptics, they'll tell you what a great witness Irenaeus is. When they're talking to Catholics, they sort of compartmentalize these things in their brain and they start telling you how worthless Irenaeus was as testimony. And the real question is, wait a minute, that's the same evidence. And this whole canon crossfire concept that I came about, that I decided to write the book around, is exactly that dichotomy, that split. What am I supposed to believe? I have the same guy telling me the same thing, that he learned both these things from John.
Yeah.
It seems like I need a consistent answer. That's where I ended up. I accept these books because of that. And that thus, I basically read my way into the broader canon than this Protestant canon.
Matthew McWhorter is my guest. He's the author of Canon Crossfire, the website canoncrossfire.com. I am Reverend Dr. D, and this is Tell Me Your Story. As we continue here with Matthew McWhorter, Matthew Mark McWhorter, if you will, this whole thing is so fascinating to me. And some of my favorite interviews have been with rabbis. And we got into a conversation, one rabbi and I, and we were talking about a particular one of the 613 Jewish laws. A rather controversial one, too. But the question, as we were talking, came up from him to me. Do you know the context under which this law was created? Now, bear in mind, my understanding is those 613 laws, those aren't from God. Those were created by man. And people love to throw those out there in terms of condemning people for the particular lifestyle that they might be leading. And I say, okay, all right, if you're going to use that one, then you've got to use the other 612. You cannot cherry pick, which means that if you have a wife who is of childbearing age, she's gone from your presence for 7 days out of the month. She is not allowed to live with you. All right, according to Jewish law. And we could go down a laundry list of different things as well. But that question was so significant to me in terms of the context under which this particular Jewish law, was created. And so I even I'll pull that back in terms of the context under which so many different versions of the Bible and certain books that were and were not included in what we refer to as the canon of Scripture. And it seems to me, Matthew, that there are some, and I want you to elaborate on this because I have no clue as to what are the first questions that we, as honestly seeking individuals, should be asking and looking for answers. Because when I would ask the ministers and the pastors and even some of the laity, if you will, of this radio station I was working for, and I was there for 15 years, mind you, I was also told I wasn't saved and ready to meet God mostly because of the questions that I was asking. And they would tell me to go read the writings of the founding fathers of the faith, which then raised two questions. Number one is, okay, I don't know who you're talking about because I haven't read them. However, does that make me equal to them because I'm asking the same questions that they are? But more importantly, Who set them up as the founding fathers of the faith? Why is it that their word is more authoritative than if I just spend some time in prayer and meditation in my closet, if you will, going within to listen to the still small voice? So let's talk a little bit about how the first printed version, and when we say printed with mechanical means, because obviously it was scribes who were writing and rewriting and rewriting, and there's speculation as to the accuracy of all of that over the course of the first 200 or 300 years. But the first printed version was the Gutenberg Bible. By the way, have you heard of the Bible that comes out of the Christian communities in Africa? It's different too.
If they're Christian. That is the question, right? Are they heretics or are they Christian? Exactly.
Interesting point.
Yep.
So talk to us a little bit about all of these different versions and what you discovered as you went along on your path to understand, to better understand what these books are, how many there are, what they mean, what's their relevance, et cetera, et cetera. I'll just throw one more thing in there. Based upon my reading of the Song of Solomon, okay, and the criterion that I remember reading for books that belong in the Bible, Song of Solomon has no business in there at all.
It's interesting. The King James Version gives you times that the New Testament references an old book, right? Mm-hmm. And it gives you for both these what Protestants call the Apocrypha, Catholics call the Deuterocanon, these extra books. It gives you for those, and it also gives you for the books of the Protestant canon, the Old Testament. Song of Solomon, there is only one very vague possible reference that the King James Version even saw to that book. That's how unintegrated it is to the rest. So it is a good example of one. And it's another example too of how people can be so unfair in their judgments. When you like something, and the Bible tells you this, you see the mote in the other guy's eye while you have a log in your own. Mm-hmm. You are so unfair to something you don't like or don't want. And what you will find in the scholarship and the apologetics, etc., is people are being very unfair to these other books because they don't think they're part of the canon, and they're being so kind to Song of Solomon because it is part of their canon. You got to judge them fairly. You have to force yourself to do that. Mm-hmm. A large part of my book is statistics and other analysis, side by side. And in this case, it's how often does the King James Version find the book of Sirach referenced in the New Testament? 64 times.
Really?
How many times does it find the Song of Solomon? 1. When you get to Sirach, from memory, I believe Paul 30 times in 13 epistles, 10 of them reference the book of Sirach, and he does it 30 times. That's from Paul, one person. 10 of his 13 epistles referencing this one book, and you tell me he didn't accept it for some reason, but he absolutely, totally accepted Song of Solomon, which he never references even once, as an example. And it's just, for my purposes, I lay all this stuff out for people. I'm telling you should be trying to make a fair, honest judgment, and I show you the fair comparisons as I see them. I leave it to the reader. But the 3 questions that I had into all of this was, as I said, what do the Jews say? Number 1. Number 2, what did the early church say? Mm-hmm. And number 3, what are these possible references that Protestant scholars, only Protestant scholars I was really looking at, reference back to these books? They found hundreds of examples of times these books are being referenced. Deep, meaningful things. They can be prophecies that they claim are fulfilled. They can be visions of the afterlife. So in the Revelations, John is describing heaven, and his description seems to be taken from the book of Tobit, for example. He is. We believe as Christians that he saw into the other world, saw into the future, saw into heaven, and did that through divine inspiration. And it just turns out that his vision absolutely seems to track a vision that claims to be divinely inspired itself and involve true angels, etc. Make of that what you want, but that is a very deep reference to one of these books. That's not, remotely the same as, Protestants sometimes will bring up, like, Paul also quoted a poet. Well, yeah, he didn't, lead you to believe that he saw this into the afterlife just as well as John did. Like, that's not quite the same thing. So again, those were the questions I had. How does the Bible reference? How does the New Testament reference this? What did the early fathers? That's every Christian in the first 450 years. And what did the Jews say? To
Mm,
go back to your question about like interpretations and different analysis, et cetera, that's going on here. Again, you go back to what the earliest Christians said. They were fighting endless heresy at the time. The Bible even references in several places that the apostles had sent people out who were now teaching heresy. So even from from biblical days, let alone centuries afterwards, there were no copyright laws in the Roman Empire. People could make up anything they wanted. How do you know what's true and what was heresy, what's falsehood, etc.? The epistles themselves tell you, the epistles of John, for example, go back to the beginning and stay faithful to what you were taught in the beginning. That will guide you correctly.
yeah.
And as I say, that's John talking there. That's what Polycarp will say in his letters, and that is what Irenaeus will say in his letters.
Yeah.
And it's Irenaeus who says Polycarp taught him Baruch because John taught him Baruch, for example.
Well, and I would add to everything you've just said, especially about no copyright laws back then,
Yeah,
and you could say whatever you want. Well, let me bring you forward to the 21st century, and people are doing that again. Well, I shouldn't
totally.
say again, and it's
I
everywhere.
I found reading through this stuff, uh, you know, fruitful on many different levels. And one of them is, my God, this is the world we're going back to,
Yeah.
right? Like we had a time where things were sort of under control with mass media and other phenomena, but even like a publishing house, it was hard for you to even print a book or whatever. Now you just put it on Amazon. There's nobody to stop you, let alone what you're putting on Twitter and everything else.
Yeah.
We're going back to the Wild West of everything. Just this morning, I wake up and I find, people going nuts over an alleged Protestant minister who has 17 wives or whatever he's got. And, he's claiming that that's biblical. And even little things that I found out, just trivia that, you find it on Wikipedia if you really look for it. But King James was gay. So the king who spawned the King James version of the Bible actually had this theory that John and Jesus were gay lovers and that made his homosexual relationship acceptable. Um, you
Now,
again, just a little piece
before
of
you go any
trivia,
further,
but
I heard that just the other day,
oh really?
and
Yeah,
I wasn't sure whether or not to put any credence into that because it was off the internet, and we've
yeah.
got AI permeating everything. So you are, uh, can
I
I
I
can I
did a
say
little
you are
bit of research.
confirming?
There was one point where I was thinking of putting it in my book. So I
Hmm.
did do a little bit of research to make sure it was correct. That doesn't mean went all the way,
Right.
but I
Okay.
did more than the usual just accepting it off the internet
Okay.
level.
All right. Well, and
But
I
yeah, no,
appreciate
no,
that.
yeah.
And
It's just you hear this all the time that people say, whatever they're talking about the
yeah.
Bible, they'll always claim it goes back to the beginning. They're, a scholar who finds something, the Jesus Seminar, the Bart Ehrman types, that these allegedly skeptical
Mm,
scholars who actually
mhm.
seem to believe any crazy theory they come up with, they will claim that they're uncovering the real Christianity. And everybody else has been believing the fake version for 2,000 years. They have the real Christ, the real words of Christ, the real this. How do you know? Answer, go all the way back and look. And when I did that, I do find that the New Testament is very well attested. It is supported. I do accept it. It's just this problem that I kept seeing that the same people are telling me about these other books, and these modern churches are telling me not to accept those other books. And
Yeah.
that's the crossfire that I'm talking about. But the answer has to be the same. And it doesn't matter, it's the same answer even if it's not Christian, right? Do
Yeah.
you want to know what Julius Caesar said?
Yeah.
You got to go all the way back. You got to look
Right.
for the corroborating evidence. You got to look
Right.
for the historical evidence. That's the
Yeah.
same inquiry.
Yeah, they call it primary source evidence. Oh, by the way, the book by John Noya was The Apocalypse Conspiracy. That was
Oh,
the
yeah.
title of the book. Now,
Yeah.
what's interesting for me is that when I was working for this station and I was still doing interviews, I didn't really have time to sit and read these books
Yeah.
until his came along. And I read his cover to cover with a yellow highlighter, and I was highlighting all over the place, right? And one of the conclusions I came to outside of his work was if the people of that day, say of Paul and Peter and the ones who wrote the epistles to the various churches in the region, if the people had gotten the message that Jesus came to bring, there would be no books between the end of the book of Acts and the beginning of the book of Revelation. You wouldn't have needed them because the people would have gotten it. But we have those books, and people still don't get it today. I love how people, the surveys where, people are asked, are you religious? No, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual.
Yeah.
And then I hear about religion within Christianity. And I say, do you know what the biblical definition of religion is? Do you really know? It is not building a mega church. It is not having hundreds or thousands of people in that mega church and having altar calls and on and on. No, the definition is taking care of the poor, the widows, and the orphans. That is the definition of religion from the Bible, from the New Testament. And I just go nuts sometimes when I hear
My
people.
experience is kind of similar. Coming to the Bible late, I read it in great depth.
Yeah.
So I went out and I bought 100 Bible commentaries to read. So I read
Wow.
Matthew chapter 1
Mhm.
across 100 different commentaries because they're
Wow.
different translations. They're all these, you have Lutherans telling you one thing, Methodists telling you another thing, Catholics telling you something, Orthodox telling you something else. And when I got to the Old Testament, I bought the Jewish Study Bible to see what Jews say about all this stuff.
Mhm.
So I'm reading it, Matthew chapter 1, read it across 100 commentaries, then read Matthew chapter 2. That's just how I did it.
Mhm.
So fascinating. But there's a lot of lessons or things that are in my head in a better fashion than these Christians that I've met that have been lifelong Christians and don't always appreciate it. So again, just like this morning, I saw Catholics and Protestants arguing over some statistical thing about the populations of churches and who is converted or whatever. Like, you're preaching a book that literally tells you the devil is running the world.
Yeah.
And you're bragging about your success in the world as if that's what you're supposed to be doing. Like,
Yeah.
it's really strange how hard the Christian message actually is to get out, even to Christian people,
Yeah. By
and to
the
really
way,
internalize it. And that includes me. I know how hard it's been for myself, but
yeah.
it's a complicated thing, and it's part of showing you how, again, how I think there's truth to this is science would tell me that my IQ is very hard, very, very high. I read a whole lot of this, that. I should know these things. This should be easy. I should be able to follow these rules so simply.
Mhm.
Nope, can't do it.
Yeah.
It's
Well, one of the things I found so fascinating when I was having a conversation back then, I said, do you understand that Christianity is a metaphysical philosophy? Oh my God, I thought they were going to fall through the floor, have a heart attack because I used the word metaphysical. And I saw this in their face and I said, hold on. Do you know what the definition of the word is? And bear in mind, almost everything Jesus spoke about, if you want to do the red letter thing, had to do with everything that was, as the definition of metaphysics or metaphysical is, that was beyond the physical. The kingdom of God is within you. And he talked about heaven, and he talked about most everything in terms of not of this world. Yeah, we're in it, but we're not of it. Even when you read, for example, and again, I can't remember if the title of this particular sermon was on the Mount or what have you, where the apostles were all bent out of shape. The disciples were going, what are we going to eat and where are we going to sleep, and on and on and on. And he talks about the birds in the trees and the lilies of the field, and let tomorrow worry about itself. And that how much more are you going to be taken care of as a child of God than the birds or the lilies? That has to do with our internal life. It is not having anything to do. I mean, he used the physical world for an example, but this isn't where we're going to stay.
And to be honest, what the one book that bothers Protestants the most is called Two Maccabees, and that book, it has a huge role in the early church, a huge role in my own views of Christianity because of that, because it's exactly the point that you're making. The focus is on the other world,
Yeah.
not on this world. And in 2 Maccabees, there's a woman with 7 sons, and she has to watch all 7 sons be martyred in front of her. So everything she ever wanted, hoped, and dreamed for is destroyed right in front of her, and they never lose faith. And the early Christians are the martyr church. They did not join Christianity because they thought it was going to end well. They joined knowing that they were almost certainly going to be killed. Of the 10 fathers that you hear of the most in the first 300 years of Christianity, 7 of them, so 7 out of 10, are martyred. They are tortured and killed for their beliefs that they wrote about that we now get to read.
Hmm.
These people, martyrdom was a huge piece of Christianity to them was, I don't care about this world. I am for the next world.
Yeah.
And that element I found, again, getting back to the modern times or whatever, like we seem to have lost that. We, particularly in the United States in the West, we have a view that, oh, if you go to church, you'll be moral, you'll learn good values, you'll this, that, the other thing. Like, what if the future of Christianity in the United States or in the world is, in many places of the world it already is persecution? And what a different message is going to be preached in those times, right? And
Yeah.
that is the preaching that I found in the Book of Maccabees. So the Book of Maccabees is huge to these people at this time. You can read what are called exhortations to martyrdom. So these legendary figures in the early church would write a book telling the people to hold fast to the faith, even as they're being martyred. Many of their last words allude to 2 Maccabees. It's a huge part of what went into the authentic early Christianity that, again, is not available in the Protestant canon.
Yeah.
And to me, I don't know. It's an example of one book that really affects me spiritually on top of everything else about
Mm.
these books. But this one is one that, like, you can really see that element in a way that modern Christianity just doesn't seem to preach too often, right?
Yeah.
No, the preacher's not going to get a whole lot of likes
No.
on Facebook and Twitter when he's telling you that you're about to be martyred, right? I mean,
Right.
like that's he's not going to get track followers, get large donations in our modern society, but that may be what Christianity returns to. It has been that many times in the past. It's
Well,
actually been that way in the United States from time to time. So,
here's the thing that surprises me, though, and we're going to get into a different subject here, and that is the attitude on the part of believers towards the way the world is today, and the attitude of surprise within the believers on the way the world is today. We're going to talk more
I
about that as we continue here with Matthew McWhorter, author of Canon Crossfire. CanonCrossfire.com is the website. I'm Reverend Dr. D, and this is Tell Me Your Story. We're going to talk a little prophecy, but we're not going to get into specifics per se. But what really boggles my mind is the believers who supposedly have read the Bible and they've read the prophecies both from the Old as well as the New, and specifically, of course, of the book of Revelation, especially. And they seem so surprised. It's like a woman with Botox, perpetually surprised that the world is the way that it is. And it's like, well, wait a minute. The book that you revere, that you say is going to tell the past, the present, and the future, why are you surprised? It says that you're going to be persecuted. You act as if you walked onto the train tracks and you're surprised that you're about to be killed by a train that's traveling 70 miles an hour. I mean, that's my analogy. And I just sit here going, where's the disconnect here? Why is it that,
It is amazing, and that was, as I say, was part of my reading of my thinking that maybe just because I read it more recently or whatever. But like this, even Revelations is one thing, but what is the fate of Paul? What is the
yeah,
fate of Peter? What happened to John? What these people were martyred. That was Christianity, and it's just we get this cultural blindness
yeah.
of like, well, it can't happen here or whatever. Like we've advanced past it, and we did not advance past anything. We just were living in a bubble for a
Yeah, but
little
at the same
while.
time, there are
Yeah,
also different sects of Christianity, I
yeah.
will use that term,
Oh yeah,
who believe that it has already, all of that has already happened. In other words,
yeah,
we're past it all.
yeah.
I don't know how they've managed. And again, I'm not an eschatologist or an apologetist. apologist. By the way, I always found it humorous at the term apologetics. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Why are you calling it apologetic? God does not need to apologize and does
Yeah.
not need you to apologize for him. I always found that funny. But anyway,
It is. It's weird how our language changes. But yeah, exactly.
well, let's talk a little bit about some of this, the philosophy of Christianity. Now,
Well, if
in your
I could,
research,
I'll give you one more
oh,
example
please
before
go
we,
ahead.
we go on to that.
Absolutely.
But like I mentioned Polycarp earlier,
Hmm.
Polycarp learned from John. There's in the book of Revelation, believed to be written by John,
Hmm.
there are these letters that go out to the churches, the seven churches. One of them is the church in Smyrna. The
Yeah.
head of the church in Smyrna at that time is Polycarp. And in the letter to Smyrna, John says, hold fast to the faith, and you will be even unto death, and you will be granted a crown. Something to that effect. You'll get the crown of heaven. Polycarp is then martyred. He is goes to his death. His last words allude to Maccabees, as I say, and Polycarp is the one who then taught Irenaeus, who says that Baruch was taught by John, etc. But it's these weird connections between all these things of noting that when you're reading Revelations and you see these letters going out, and you know one of the ways of looking at Revelations is that it speaks to the current times and the future. And in the current times, the Church of Smyrna would have been Polycarp, this person. So it's just kind of fascinating to see how those things all interconnect.
Well, I know
Sorry,
there are
go
other
on.
books that are out there, and I'm sure that they're out there. For example, I'm sure there's one out there called The Book of Revelations for Dummies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all of
Yeah,
the other 66 or 72
yeah.
books, I'm sure, have that book's title for dummies. That or even what do they call those little synopsis that you could buy in the
Uh,
bookstores? And I can't remember the name of those. They were
Pocket
little,
guide or something. Yeah,
yeah, exactly, exactly. They were like the Cliff Notes, I guess it
yeah.
was, for this book or that book and so forth. And I'll tell you something else that is rather frustrating too, in terms of what I said earlier about, they determined that, okay, the actual translation or correct translation of "Thou shalt not kill" is "Thou shalt not murder." And I sit there thinking about the book of Mark Twain, about Huckleberry Finn. And I read that in school, in high school, many years ago. I loved the story, was not offended by the language in any way, shape, or form. And then about, I'm going to say 10 or 15 years ago, I saw this story about how people were going to, we'll call it cleanse Huckleberry Finn by
Bowdlerize it.
removing,
Yeah,
specifically the N word.
yeah,
And it's like, okay, then I'm going to do the same thing with the Bible. And everywhere that it mentions God, I'm going to change it to she.
yeah,
Okay, because God and he is offensive to me because, and it's not really, but I'm making a
yeah.
point. And it's like, what are you doing? I do love the translation. I don't know about you, but if you've ever read these translations in the modern vernacular, let's say, for the young people who are into rap, for
Yeah.
example, or other like styles of writing, or maybe even in although some people would say King James is sort of Shakespearean, not quite. It's not quite there, but nonetheless, I think that that's fascinating because they're just trying to get out this message to people who probably would not ordinarily read it because they're not going to read the King James or the New American Standard or this version or that version,
And
or
and they probably couldn't.
and they
I mean,
probably,
without extensive footnotes and other help, it's
yeah,
hard for anybody to read it. But particularly somebody who hasn't received a formal
yeah.
education
You ever read the
and
Gutenberg
how to do
Bible?
it. I'm sorry.
You ever read the Gutenberg Bible?
I own the Gutenberg.
Oh my,
So when I went out and I was buying books, I bought a Gutenberg. Some people say it's fake. They claim it's a facsimile, but I never double check. So I am certain in my belief that I own a true
yeah.
Gutenberg. So,
By the way, I took printing class in high school in
oh
one of
yeah.
these clubs. My father was a printer. He worked for a company that printed checks,
Yeah,
and they would use typeset as well as those big metal rollers and that kind of thing,
yeah,
right? And I learned how to set type and learn how to read it both upside down and backwards because that's how you had to set it.
yeah.
And I can only imagine the challenges. And again, it wasn't in English. The Gutenberg
Yeah.
Bible, I don't believe, was in English originally, but
No,
still
Latin. Yeah.
trying to set that type
Yeah.
or whatever method that they used to be able to print one page and then the next page and then the
Yeah.
next page and so forth. Oh my heavens. I mean that the Herculean effort, and it would take the patience of Paul, shall we say,
Yeah.
to get through something like that. Not to mention the scribes who had the little pens, the little quills and ink, and they had to rewrite it word for word exactly. And then there had to have been proofreaders. I mean, it's extraordinary. But what's really extraordinary, Matthew, is the finds that we have had over the centuries of these, as you've quite accurately stated, scrolls, not books, but scrolls that you would unroll very carefully as you're wanting to read, whether it was from the Torah or other books of the Old Testament and so forth. Um, and of course, here we are today, and those are now very, very fragile. But thank goodness we have technologies that we're actually able to begin the process of slowly rolling those out and getting the words, the lettering, the characters, and so forth, so they can be translated, so we can have a better understanding. Um, there's a piece of information, I'm curious if you ever researched this, that I haven't been able to find anywhere. According to the New Testament, Mary and Joseph, pre-birth, were headed to, if I'm correct, Bethlehem in order to be accounted in the census. Now, the real proof of the existence of this man we refer to from the Bible as Jesus of Nazareth would be that his parents' names and his name would appear in the census rolls. But I haven't been able to find that. Have you?
No, and I wouldn't expect to find it. One of the things you learn about in this space is just how precious the tiniest piece of evidence actually is.
Yeah.
I think from memory, we only know the names of like 3,000 people who lived in Judea within 500 years forward or backwards of Christ,
Hmm.
something like that. That's from memory, but it is a shockingly small number of people we know the names of, mostly from gravestones, a fraction from, I think they found a depository of lawsuits of all things. So
Oh,
we know people involved in some of these lawsuits, and then it's these graves and a handful of other stuff. So it's shockingly little evidence that you're pouring through to
yeah.
try to find these things. But there are references to Jesus out, etc. That's
Yeah.
covered in the case for Christ. It'll show you, but they're just scraps. They're
Mhm.
mentions of his name. I
Yeah.
think if I remember, within 150 years of Christ, 42 people mention his name. That's just his name. That's
Yeah.
all we have. That's 20 people in the New Testament, nine early church fathers, if I remember right. And then you're talking about what, 13 other people
Yeah.
within
But
150 years?
yeah, but here's the kicker for me. I don't care if you found the Noah's Ark. I don't care if you found the wood of the cross that Jesus was crucified on, or the stone that was rolled in front of the
Yeah.
cave where he was laid to rest, or any other piece of physical material evidence, because it's a faith, it's a belief, and belief is not based upon evidence.
I have this question. I wonder it because you'll read, John McWhorter wrote
Hmm.
a long essay that I remember reading years ago on miracles, for example.
Hmm.
And he'll tell you, why they're not happening. His belief was that miracles ended during the New Testament era, but that they were true then. And it's like, why would you believe them then? Why would you 2,000 years later believe in miracles that you're reading about from these scraps of paper
Hmm.
when there's actually even more evidence of modern miracles, which you don't believe? You could believe or not believe them. I don't, it doesn't matter. But
Yeah.
you can actually go meet people who claim to have seen miracles. You can, see objects that allegedly are miraculous in one way or the other. There are events like Fatima that are
Hmm.
claimed to have tens of thousands
Lourdes.
of witnesses, etc. Like, yeah, Lourdes is another example with medically documented circumstance that
Yeah.
doctors cannot explain.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Like you have shockingly good evidence in the modern era that you absolutely refuse to believe in, but then you believe this historical evidence when it is so scanty.
Yeah.
Um, it's ultimately, to me, it's ultimately a question of whether you believe the Christians that passed this down, right? It's
Yep.
whether you find it all trustworthy. That was one reason why I wanted to read what they had to say,
Yep.
hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and see what they believed and what they did. And, I was reassured by that, but it is ultimately a question of faith. I can understand why people might not be, but I was reassured, and I just felt that the evidence matched this metaphysical, to use your word, theology that I was reading in the Bible, and that's what ultimately led to my conversion. But it is an evidentiary review for me. I need that confirmation.
Yeah.
So if you did find Noah's Ark or the stone out in front of the tomb, et cetera, the things that they might or might not have found, that's a little help. Um, there's bigger items that have been bigger help. I don't know if you heard about the one, all the crucifixions of the Roman Empire, you were crucified with your 2 feet separate.
Hmm.
Each foot had a separate nail. The
Right.
only time and for a long time that was used against Christianity, the only time that they have found where someone was nailed through was in Judea around the time of Christ.
Mm.
So this
Interesting.
weird detail that's in the Bible that used to be held against us is actually kind of proof that it comes from at least that time and place. Doesn't mean Christianity is fully true, but the story of the crucifixion matches that time and place and should not match that description if it was written any other time or place.
Exactly. Matthew McWhorter is my guest, author of the Canon Crossfire. Website is canoncrossfire.com. We'll be linked to that website as well here on Tell Me Your Story. You mentioned miracles, Matthew McWhorter. I'm fascinated by this. There's another passage in the New Testament where the disciples they're watching Jesus do all these miracles, turning water into wine, walking on water, turning fishes into loaves and fishes, multiplying them like you wouldn't believe, healing the sick, the blind, and so on and so on and so on, raising the dead.
Yeah.
And they go, "Hey." By the way, I'll paraphrase here, and I'm not King Jimmy, so I ain't even going to try. Um, that's cool. Could you teach us how to do that, man? I mean, that is so awesome. And he looks at him and he says, basically, once again, paraphrasing, this, oh, that's nothing. Sure, I'll show you how to do this stuff. But let me tell you something. And I believe that the you wasn't exclusively referring to the disciples or apostles at that day. I think it was referring to all of us throughout history to the present. He says, that's nothing. This is nothing by comparison to the greater works that you will do.
Yeah.
And you, Matthew, and this is just my opinion, my observation, you have done that greater work because you have transformed your life. That is what it's
You're
all
the
about to
devil.
me.
You're the devil. You're trying to get my ego going here, man.
No.
Come on.
To me that, and then we talk about that all the time on this program, that it is about the transformation of our lives from what it was to what it could be. Um, my favorite passage, or I should say, I came across this in the New Testament where it says, Jesus says, "Be ye perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." And I thought, what? Well, what is that perfection? Now, I'm gonna have to pull my strong concordance out of a box somewhere because we're still unpacking from the move.
Yeah.
But I'll have to look that up. But I pondered that, and it drew me back to the Old Testament where it is said, the words are stated, "I am that I am." Present tense, the now. So I took that back to that passage in the New Testament, "Be ye perfect," which has nothing to do with good or bad, right or wrong, light or dark. It has to do with just being who I am right now. Nothing else. And I thought, wow. I mean, for me, and again, when I share these kinds of things, they're mine. Okay. I don't put them on anybody. I don't tell you, oh, by the way, you need to believe this too. No, 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 no. But that's my observation, is that to be perfect, just be who you were created to be. right now. And to me, that is also part of that greater works, that transformation as I see it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's similar to things I think of all the time, but in a different context. But like why did it fall to me to create this book? And it's like, well, God kept me alive through some rather amazing medical adventures that I had that nearly
Hmm.
killed me, right? He keeps me alive. I come to this book with no real preconceptions as to who's right on about this canon. I just want to research it. I
Hmm.
come with a lifetime of skill as a lawyer in researching and doing evidence and sorting through it, and a lifetime of summarizing and synthesizing all of that, collecting it and putting it together so that my client can quickly read it, what I wrote, and understand all the stuff that I read that he doesn't now have to read because I explained it to him, right? Like
Hmm.
I have these skills. I come to this, it's like I feel like I was made for this book.
Hmm.
Like that's what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it's occurred to me many times. It's like, why didn't anybody else do it? And it's like, well, they didn't, they cared. They thought they were Protestant, so they thought the answer was Protestant. They were Catholic, so they thought the answer was Catholic. They weren't really asking themselves, well, which of these two is telling me the truth about what what was came from the beginning, etc. Whereas I just wanted to know the answer,
Yeah.
so I did it. It's also one reason that no one did it before. It would have been hard before the internet, right?
Hmm.
These things from the fathers are now available to me to go out and find cheaply and easily and go read them all so that I'm able to assemble everything they said in the first 450 years. It would have been very difficult to do that. There is an online index that lets me go find these things as well, which wouldn't have existed, a couple
Yeah.
generations back. It started in the 60s as a book, but was very expensive. Only the largest Christian seminaries would have had it, etc.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that came into it, and it's just like, this is it. This is the moment I was made for. Put it
Hmm.
together.
Yeah. Well, we're so glad that you did. It certainly sparked a lot of thought in my own mind as far as that's concerned. And it also helps to sort of solidify what I've always believed, that there have always been other writings more than the 66 or 72. I've often wondered why they were withheld. I know there are lots of reasons. Obviously, they didn't conform the way that the powers that be. By the way, I also read that the very first propaganda war took place some 15 to 1800 years ago, 1700 years ago, I guess. And that was between the church in that day and everybody else. Well, we already know who won. The church won. They won that propaganda war. But what I'm finding fascinating through even you, believe it or not, Matthew, even through your work, that shall we call it the propaganda war, is now being lost by the church,
Yeah.
be it Protestant or Catholic, because, and I can share this, my parents, my father was Protestant. He converted to Catholicism when he married my mother, and they raised us that way. Um, they disconnected from organized religion about 20 or 25 years ago because they were so disgusted with the behavior of those supposed leaders, if you will, of both sides, and so forth. And they said no. And so they are among the crowd of spiritual people who try to do the best they can to live the best that they can, trust in God. My father told me near the end of his life that he didn't believe in organized religion, but he did believe in God and so forth. And I remember talking with Greg Brayton on this program years ago. He wrote a book called The Healing Power of Belief. And in the conversation, he says, today we believe, but tomorrow, whenever that happens, tomorrow we will no longer believe. We will know. And I honestly believe that the work that you are doing helps us to at least get a glimpse into the knowing and hopefully helps us to understand who we are and where we are in the grand scheme of things by putting. And by the way, you've done something that I encourage people to do, but you've put this into a context that we can understand through the book Canon Crossfire at canoncrossfire.com, available through Amazon as well. Um, it's just it's like you had 100 different commentaries and certainly different versions of the Bible. And we here at Tell Me Your Story encourage people to, in your case, you've got all of these Bibles, and we'll maybe codify it down into one. And what we want you to do is there's a circle around this book, right?
Yeah.
And we want you to walk around the circle on different points. And we want you to gather the information as you see it, as you observe it, as you feel it, as you sense it, and so forth. And keep moving so that you can make a more informed choice about it. You've heard the phrase that if you have 10 people who see a car wreck, you're going to get 10 different reports.
And
And
you would
that's why
never, if you're on a jury or you're a judge and there's a lawsuit about that car wreck,
yeah.
you listen to all of that. You get all 10 different versions. Then you listen to the arguments from both sides. Then you decide.
Mm-hmm.
You start by learning all 10 before you even hear the arguments, let
Yeah.
alone before you decide.
Yeah.
That is how you expect, the smallest legal matter to be done. And it's kind of amazing to me that that's so not normal
Yeah.
to humans and how we interact. We got to force ourselves to do it, but it is clearly the best way to make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And you would think for something this important, that's what everyone would do.
Exactly.
Not a
It's
chance.
funny too because I was summoned for jury duty at one point, and I went down and I sat there in the gallery waiting for my name to be called and so forth. Now, as they call people up and they have them sit in the jury box, both prosecution and defense ask questions. They ask questions about what they think and so on and so forth. But they even in this case were asking questions that related to the case. And basically, from what I understood from the questions, this woman was down at the wharf in Santa Barbara during a celebration where there was alcohol served. She went to use one of the porta potties. She tripped and fell and knocked teeth out of the front of her mouth. And she was suing the city because she claimed there wasn't enough light. All right, now that's what I heard. And if the judge had called me up there, I said, I've already made my decision, Your Honor. The woman has no basis for a claim because she chose to drink the alcohol and then chose to go use the porta potty, whether there was sufficient light or not. And because she was inebriated by her own choice, she fell and broke out her teeth. So I'm siding with the prosecution, not the defense. And I'd get thrown off the jury, hopefully post haste.
Yeah.
But it's like I hear those questions that are being asked by the lawyers to the potential jurors. And it's like, well, I already know where I stand based upon these questions that are being asked. But at the same time, we have a real problem in this country, especially, but I know it's globally, where we will hear about an event, especially on social media, but maybe on your breaking news, that it just happened, that this happened. And immediately we all start to pass judgment. Oh my gosh, that person did this and that person did that. And they must be a member of this group and that group and the other. And then as time goes on, day after day after day, more information is released. And you begin to realize, oh, I was wrong. I made a knee-jerk reaction based upon what was being said. And I was only getting one perspective. And I think that what you're trying to teach us is that we need to get different perspectives on things. And I thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I wanted to do, was to find out what all the Christians said. I wanted every perspective. Instead of just hearing, well, the Protestants quote these 10, you give you 10 quotes from the early church, or Catholics give you 10. Like, what did they all say? Turned out they said thousands of things.
Yeah.
And when you're only listening to one side, you're only getting 10. I wanted to know what they all said.
Yeah, and I know it's encouraged in this highly this heightened political era that we're in here in the 2020s. Some people say that if you really want to get a balance, you need to listen to both sides, and it's like, I can't listen to either side. I'm sorry, I just can't.
Yeah.
It's just too much. And besides, I live by the quote of Abraham Lincoln, who said, "Never trust anything you read or see on the internet."
Exactly.
Yeah, go and find that one in the archives, ladies and
Yeah.
gentlemen. Matthew McWhorter's my guest, and his book again is called Canon Crossfire. CanonCrossfire.com is the website as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. Matthew, I want to thank you so much for being a part of the work we're doing here. You've done some extraordinary work, and obviously your background as a lawyer has helped you to research this to the degree that you have, and you certainly have a case. There's no question about it. I would say that as the grand jury, that yes, you can certainly go after an indictment if you'd like. However that would work, I don't know, but
Exactly. Yeah.
but thank you for being a part of the work we're doing here.
Thank you. God bless.
I have three final questions that I do want to
Yeah.
ask you that I ask all of my guests. But before I do that, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., and streaming live at all nine of those times at richarddugan.com. We're on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and you can watch these conversations on YouTube. I hope that you will subscribe as well as click notification. We also hope you'll go to Amazon and get a copy of my book, Choices 5 Steps for Life. It's available in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. And maybe I'm not the piano man, but maybe you could leave a tip. Our tip jar is called PayPal. And if you go to richarddugan.com, there are links to both Amazon for the book choices as well as to PayPal. And if you can leave us a tip, we would be gratefully appreciative. I thank you, thank you, thank you for those who have helped and to those who will help. And finally, we ask that you take some time to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place. And I'm sure Matthew spent a lot of time there as well. And listen to that still small voice. With all that being said, we do move to our final three questions for this program and for this guest. And the first of those three is, who is Matthew Mark McWhorter?
Ah, if only I really knew the answer to that, right? Yeah, I grew up in Ohio and went off to become a lawyer because I was good at debate. So that's kind of my background that got me into it. Did not really like being a lawyer, but it's a good job, so I kept it up until it was time to retire. But that's basically my background. I'm a huge football fan. I have become Christian now and all that, but uh, before that, I would say I was half a human being. I was so focused on getting ahead, on becoming a lawyer and doing a good job at work that I really didn't have a whole lot of other life to me. And I really regret that now that I see that there is more to life and should have been more all along. And I wish I'd put a little more thought into who I was and who I would become when I was younger. So.
What gets you up in the morning?
Uh, to be honest, this newfound love of Christ and love of the world that I didn't have before. I was so self-centered and uninterested in things, and now all of a sudden I see how things fit, how the world works, how other people um, matter in a way that they didn't before. We are souls. People, we fight for souls, and before you can watch the world sort of grind a soul into dust it is our job as Christians to fight for those souls and people. And sometimes that just means cheering them up. Sometimes that means doing them a favor. But now I live for that sort of stuff, like those opportunities, right? To get out there and help somebody.
Final question. What was your best day?
That is a good question. It's hard to say that it actually relates to this because it was sort of a slow transition, right? As I kept reading this stuff. So there isn't sort of one day.
Mhm.
My happiest days would involve football, so that doesn't really count. Yeah, yeah. My best day probably the day that I retired, and the day I could look back and move on to look back on all of that and look forward to moving on with my life and becoming someone new, and regrounding myself as a human being, shall we say? That was probably my best. Yeah,
I'm going to add because the universe asks the questions. I'm just
yeah,
along for the ride, mind
yeah.
you. So I'm going to ask you a fourth question,
By all
and that
means.
is, let's just say, for the sake of argument, God willing, it's not your last day on earth. If it were,
Yeah.
what message would you want to leave as your legacy to those who are listening and watching?
That actually comes into what the book is and how it came to it. Because people would ask me sort of, how did you end up along this path? How did you get there? And the book is me trying to explain how I got there. It is trying to show people that you can look into the evidence and see that Christianity is well evidenced.
Hmm.
While it is a faith-based decision, it's not purely faith. It's not like I just deluded myself into Christianity. It's that I saw the rational basis for Christianity, the as you say, metaphysical basis for Christianity, and I
Hmm.
matched that with the evidence. And, I would hope everybody gets back to that sort of thinking because I think that's part of why people lose faith and lose interest,
Mm.
and focus on the sins of the church, etc., is that they've lost this connection to, well, this is actually, there really was a man who was God. God became man, and he really did die for us, and he really did preach these things. We can actually show that. And I think people should focus on that far more. And that's the message I'm hoping to get out there to people.
Well, we thank you for answering that fourth question and for being a part of the work that we're doing here. And we look forward to talking with you again as you continue your journey on this particular path. And we thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love Talal. Jeanette, I'm still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. Mike, thanks for being in my life and letting me be in yours. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.